My son shouted, "I'm done taking care of you," then locked me out of the house. But I taught him a lesson he won't forget. I never thought my son would lock me out of my own home. Not the home I'd sacrificed everything to hold. Not the son I'd given everything to raise. But there I stood, my hand still burning from where it had slapped against the door. The metallic taste of shock spreading through my mouth as I realized what had just happened. The welcome mat, the one I'd bought 15 years ago with the little bluebirds around the border, was now shoved under the door like a pathetic barricade. Locked out. Me, Linda Walker, from my own house. It had been such a small request. "Evan, can you help me with these groceries?" The plastic bags had been cutting into my fingers, leaving angry red welts across my palms. My arthritis had been acting up, the November chill settling into my joints. Just a simple request for help from my only son. That's all it took to ignite the explosion. "You're always asking for something," he'd snapped, not looking up from his laptop screen. "Can't you handle anything yourself?" I'd stood there, stunned, the weight of the groceries suddenly forgotten. "Excuse me?" He'd slammed his laptop shut, turned to me with eyes I barely recognized. "I'm tired of this, Mom. I've got my own problems. I'm drowning in work stress. My girlfriend just broke up with me, and you're constantly needing something." "Evan, I'm just asking for help with groceries. They're mostly things I bought for you anyway." That's when his face changed into something hard and unfamiliar. "That's the problem. I never asked for your help. I'm done taking care of you. I'm done with all of this." The words had hit me like physical blows. Taking care of me? When had he ever taken care of me? Now, as I stood trembling on the porch, I could hear him stomping around inside the house, my house, muttering angrily to himself. The same house I'd spent 23 years paying off after his father died, working double shifts at the hospital as a nurse and picking up weekend book cope work just to make the mortgage. The same house where, in the basement, there still sat 3 large filing cabinets filled with the paper trail of all the ways I had silently kept my son afloat without him ever knowing. I pressed my forehead against the cool door. "Evan, please. Let's talk about this."
There's nothing to talk about.
His voice was muffled but still sharp enough to cut. "I need space. I need to be my own person without you constantly hovering." Hovering. The word almost made me laugh through my shock. I hadn't hovered over Evan since he was in high school. What I had done was become a ghost in his life. An invisible guardian angel he never saw. When Evan had dropped out of college to pursue his first startup, an app that supposedly helped people find parking spaces in urban areas, I'd said nothing discouraging. I'd nodded and smiled and told him to follow his dreams. What I hadn't told him was that when the startup inevitably failed 6 months later, it was my $30,000 from my retirement fund that paid off the investors he'd disappointed. When he'd maxed out his credit cards trying to launch his second business venture, customized workout plans that never quite materialized into a functioning website, I'd been the one who negotiated with the credit card companies, posing as his financial advisor, working out payment plans and then anonymously making those payments from my own account. The car he drove, the one he bragged about getting such a great deal on, had been such a great deal because I'd slipped the dealer $5,000 in cash to lower the price, making Evan feel accomplished when he negotiated the final cost down. His apartment during his finding himself phase in his mid-20s, I'd been secretly covering half his rent for 2 years, sending money directly to his landlord with strict instructions, never to mention it to my son. Even now, at 32, living back in my house while building his consulting business, he had no idea that I still paid his student loans every month, covered his health insurance, and kept a special account just for the emergencies that seemed to follow him like shadows. And he thought he was taking care of me. I pulled my coat tighter around my shoulders as the wind picked up. My phone was inside. My purse was inside. Even my house keys were inside, dropped on the kitchen counter when I'd come home with the groceries. Through the door, I could hear him on the phone now. "Yeah, man, I finally did it. Told her I'm not her caretaker anymore. No, she's fine. She's just dramatic. She's got plenty of friends she can call. I deserve my own life, you know." I stepped back from the door, something cold and hard forming in my chest. For 32 years, I had been the safety net my son never saw. For 32 years, I had caught him every time he fell, patting his failures until they felt like minor setbacks rather than the consequences of his own choices. And in all that time, he had never once recognized it. My legs carried me down the porch steps mechanically. I had no destination in mind, just away. Away from the bewildering pain of being cast out by the very person I had given everything to protect. The grocery bags were still sitting in the driveway where I'd set them down to open the front door. I picked them up automatically, the muscle memory of responsibility too ingrained to ignore. Milk, eggs, the special non-GMO cereal Evan insisted on, the expensive coffee he liked, all the things I regularly bought to make his life comfortable. I started walking down the street, the grocery bags now feeling absurdly heavy. 3 houses down lived the Hendersons. I'd helped their daughter through a rough patch with drugs years ago, using my connections at the hospital to get her into a good program. They'd always told me to come to them if I ever needed anything. But I couldn't bring myself to knock on their door. What would I say? My son thinks he's been taking care of me, and he's tired of it. The absurdity would be too much to explain. Instead, I found myself walking toward the bus stop at the end of our street. There was someone I needed to talk to, someone who had warned me years ago that I was setting myself up for exactly this kind of heartbreak. As I waited for the bus, I pulled out my cell phone, then remembered it was still sitting on the kitchen counter inside my locked house. A bitter laugh escaped me. Even now, I was accustomed to having backup plans, contingencies, safety nets. But this time, I had none. An older gentleman sitting on the bench looked up at me with concern. "Are you all right, ma'am?" I realized there were tears streaming down my face. "My son just locked me out of my own house," I said, the words sounding unreal even as they left my mouth. The man's eyes widened slightly. "Do you need to call someone? The police?" I shook my head. No police. The thought of officers showing up, of forcing my way back into my own home through legal means, made me feel sick. "I just need to call a friend." He hesitated, then held out his phone. "Here, use mine." With trembling fingers, I dialed one of the few numbers I still knew by heart. "Marcia, it's Linda. I need your help." As the bus approached, I looked back down the street toward my house. For a moment, I thought I saw a figure in the window. Evan, perhaps realizing what he'd done. But then the bus arrived, blocking my view, and when it moved again, the window was empty. I stepped onto the bus, clutching the grocery bags, leaving behind much more than just a house. I was leaving behind decades of enabling, of silent sacrifice, of love that had somehow morphed into something unsustainable. And as painful as this moment was, a tiny voice inside me whispered that perhaps, just perhaps, this was long overdue. Marcia's apartment was small but warm, with mismatched furniture that somehow looked intentional rather than haphazard. She had always had that gift, making imperfection seem like an artistic choice. "Here," she said, pressing a steaming mug of chamomile tea into my hands. "Rain this. You're still shaking." I hadn't noticed the tremors in my fingers until she pointed them out. The bus ride had passed in a blur, my mind replaying Evan's words over and over. "I'm done taking care of you." The cruel irony of it made my chest ache. "I should have listened to you years ago," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Marcia sat across from me, her eyes lined now with the same wrinkles that had crept onto my own face over the years, full of concern rather than judgment. We'd worked together at Memorial Hospital for 15 years before she'd retired early to care for her sister. She'd seen firsthand how I'd structured my entire life around Evan's needs. "Tell me everything," she said. And so I did. The words poured out of me like a dam had broken, all the secret ways I'd been propping up my son's life without his knowledge. "Last month," I said, staring into my tea, "his truck was about to be repossessed. He'd missed 3 payments. The finance company called our house phone by mistake instead of his cell. I transferred $642 from my emergency fund to cover it. Called them back, pretending to be his assistant." Marcia's eyebrows rose. "His assistant?" I told them I was calling on behalf of Mr. Walker to resolve the outstanding balance. A bitter laugh escaped me. They thanked me for my prompt attention to the matter. And Evan never knew. I shook my head. He mentioned a week later that the finance company must have messed up their records because they weren't sending him late notices anymore. My fingers tightened around the mug. He actually called them incompetent. Marcia sighed, reaching across to pat my hand.
What about that startup he was so proud of last year?
The meal planning service? Meal Mastery. Even saying the name made me feel tired. I put in $20,000 as an angel investor. He never made the connection that his anonymous first investor appeared right after I refinanced the house. The look on Marcia's face reflected what I was only now beginning to fully recognize, the extent of my own complicity in creating the man my son had become. And his new business contacts, the consulting gigs he's been landing? Marcia asked. I looked down, shame burning my cheeks. My former patient Jeffrey Barnes owns 3 restaurants downtown. I called in a favor, and the website design project he's so proud of, that came through Dr. Weston's daughter. I delivered her babies, both of them. I've been collecting on goodwill for years, Marcia, spinning a web of opportunities around him that he thinks he created himself. Marcia stood up and walked to her window, looking out at the evening traffic below. You know what this reminds me of? Remember that patient we had, the one with Munchausen by proxy? The mother who kept making her child sick so she could save him. The comparison stung, but I couldn't deny the uncomfortable parallel. I wasn't making him sick, I whispered. No, Marcia turned back to me, her expression softening. But you were keeping him tethered so you could keep saving him. The end result isn't so different, Linda. I hadn't thought of it that way before, but sitting in Marcia's apartment, locked out of my own home, the truth of her words crashed down on me. I had robbed my son of the chance to experience real consequences, to develop resilience, to become fully adult. What happens now? I asked, more to myself than to Marcia. Now? She came back to sit beside me. Now the threads start unraveling, and they will, Linda. Without you constantly reinforcing them, they will. His car payment is due next week, I said. The reality of the situation's starting to sink in. His health insurance premium the week after that. The registration for his business license needs renewal by the end of the month. Marcia took my hands in hers. And what will happen if those things don't get paid? The answer was obvious, but terrifying. He'll lose them. Yes. And then what? I shook my head, the prospect too painful to contemplate. I can't let that happen. He's still my son. He locked you out of your own house, Linda, Marcia reminded me gently. Maybe it's time to let some of those threads break. The thought made my stomach clench. For so many years, I'd measured my worth as a mother, as a person, by how well I could shield Evan from hardship. The idea of deliberately stepping back felt like a betrayal of everything I thought I stood for. But what was the alternative? Continue the charade until I had nothing left to give. Until he had drained every last resource I'd spent a lifetime building. You saved him so many times, Linda, Marcia said, echoing my thoughts. Maybe it's time you save yourself. I took a deep, shuddering breath. I don't know if I can. You already started when you walked away from that door instead of begging to be let back in. She was right. In that moment on the porch, something had shifted within me, a small spark of self-preservation that had lain dormant for decades. As the evening deepened into night, Marcia made up her guest room for me. She lent me pajamas, a toothbrush, even an old cell phone she kept as a backup. Lying in an unfamiliar bed, I stared at the ceiling and thought about all the invisible threads now stretched to breaking point. The payments, the arrangements, the silent interventions that had become the architecture of Evan's life. My son had mistaken the safety net for his own wings, never once looking down to see what kept him aloft. Soon, very soon, gravity would assert itself. And for the first time in his adult life, Evan would fall without me rushing to catch him. The thought terrified me. But beneath the terror lay something else, a fragile, tentative hope that maybe, just maybe, he would finally learn to fly on his own. Morning arrived with harsh clarity. I awoke disoriented in Marcia's guest room, momentarily confused by the unfamiliar ceiling above me. Then yesterday's events crashed back. Evan's outburst, the locked door, the crumpled welcome mat, my son believing I was the burden when all along I had been the foundation he stood upon. I sat up slowly, my back stiff from the unfamiliar mattress. My first instinct was to check my phone, a phantom limb sensation, reaching for a device that wasn't there. How many mornings had begun with me scanning for financial alerts tied to Evan's accounts? How many days had started with me quietly resolving some crisis he never knew existed? Coffee's ready, Marcia called from the kitchen. I found her already dressed for the day, efficient as always, arranging toast and scrambled eggs on 2 plates. "You didn't have to cook," I said, suddenly self-conscious about imposing on her life. "And you didn't have to spend 30 years being your son's secret financial guardian angel, yet here we are." She handed me a mug of coffee, strong and black the way we both preferred it after years of hospital night shifts. "Eat. We have decisions to make." "Like what?" I asked, though I already knew. "Like whether you're going back to that house today." The eggs turned to sand in my mouth. "I have to. My things, my clothes, my life is there." "Your possessions are there," Marcia corrected gently. "Your life is wherever you decide it should be from now on." After breakfast, Marcia insisted on driving me to a bank. "First things first," she said, keys jangling in her hand. "You need to protect yourself." At the bank, I opened a new account, one Evan had no knowledge of, and transferred half of my savings into it. The other half I left where it was accessible to Evan through the joint account we'd maintained since he was in high school. A clean break seemed impossible, but a start was necessary. "What about your direct deposits? Your pension payments?" the bank manager asked. I hesitated, pen hovering over the form. "The new account," Marcia answered for me. "All of it goes to the new account." Next, we went to a mobile phone store, where I purchased a simple smartphone to replace the one locked inside my house. As the salesperson transferred my number to the new device, I felt a strange mix of loss and liberation. 3 missed calls, the salesperson announced as my phone activated. All from the same number, Evan Walker. My heart leapt. "He's looking for me." Marcia's eyes met mine. "Of course he is. The reality of your absence is probably setting in." I reached for the phone, but Marcia placed her hand over mine. "What exactly are you planning to say to him?" The question stopped me cold. What was I planning to say? That I forgave him. That I would come home and we could pretend nothing had happened. That I would continue being his invisible safety net. "I don't know," I admitted. "Then maybe it's not time to call back yet." We spent the afternoon at a department store where I purchased 3 changes of clothes, toiletries, and a small suitcase. Each item I selected felt like both a surrender and a declaration. I was acknowledging that my exile might not be temporary. "You could stay with me," Marcia offered as we loaded the purchases into her car. "For as long as you need." Tears pricked at my eyes. "Why are you doing all this for me?" She shut the trunk with a decisive thud. "Because 20 years ago, when my husband left me for his secretary, you did the same for me. You didn't lecture me on how I should have seen it coming, or tell me to forgive him right away. You just gave me space to fall apart and then put myself back together." My phone buzzed again. Evan calling for the 4th time. Again, I let it go to voicemail. That evening, as Marcia and I sat on her small balcony watching the sunset paint the sky in defiant streaks of orange and pink, my phone lit up with a text notification. "Where are you? I need the account passwords for the utilities. Bill says payment is overdue." Not "I'm sorry," not "please come home." Just another request. Another need. "He doesn't even realize what he's lost yet," I murmured, showing Marcia the text. "No," she agreed. "But he will." I set the phone down without responding. "You know what the hardest part of all this is?" I said after a long silence. "It's not the house or the money or even his ingratitude. It's that I honestly thought I was helping him all these years. I convinced myself that protecting him from failure was the same as loving him." Marcia reached over and squeezed my hand. Most painful lessons are learned through love gone sideways. That night I lay awake in the guest bed, my mind replaying a memory. Evan at 7 years old trying to ride a bicycle without training wheels. I had hovered behind him, hands outstretched, ready to catch him at the first wobble. "Let me do it myself, Mom," he had insisted. Reluctantly, I had stepped back, watching him pedal unevenly down the sidewalk. He had fallen, of course he had, skinning his knee badly. But the look of triumph on his face when he got back on that bike and finally rode on his own had been transcendent. Somewhere along the way, I had forgotten that lesson. I had forgotten that falling was part of learning to ride. My phone buzzed again with another text. "Mom, seriously, where are you?" This time, I typed a response. "I'm safe. You'll need to figure the bills out on your own this time." It wasn't much, just a small step toward a different kind of relationship. But as I pressed send, I felt a burden lift that I hadn't known I was carrying. The crushing weight of being someone's invisible savior. I had walked away with empty hands. Yes, but for the first time in decades, I was starting to the stirrings of my own dignity. 2 weeks passed. I settled into a strange new routine at Marcia's apartment, sleeping in her guest room and helping with cooking and cleaning to earn my keep. I found unexpected comfort in these simple domestic tasks: chopping vegetables, folding laundry, watering plants, activities done for their own sake rather than as part of an elaborate system of invisible support. Evan's text messages evolved from demanding to confused to increasingly desperate. Day 3. Mom, the internet got shut off. Where do we keep the account info? Day 5. The refrigerator is empty. Did you schedule a grocery delivery? Day 7. Something's wrong with my car. The dealer says there's no warranty on record, but I know I paid for one. I responded only enough to let him know I was safe, but never with solutions. Each message felt like a small stone dropping into the pit of my stomach, but I resisted the overwhelming urge to swoop in and fix everything. Marcia would catch me staring at my phone, hand trembling, and gently take it from me. "Not this time," she would say. "Not anymore." On day 10, my former neighbor Helen called. "Linda, I don't mean to worry you," she said. Her voice hushed as if sharing state secrets, "but there's a notice on your door. Looks official." And well, Evan's truck got towed this morning. My hand tightened around the phone. Repossessed? I think so. He was shouting at the tow truck driver something awful. The whole neighborhood could hear. The image of Evan, my son who had always projected such confident success, standing in the driveway screaming as his prized possession was hauled away, made my chest ache. Part of me wanted to call the finance company immediately, to make it all go away with another silent payment. But another part, a part growing stronger each day, recognized this as the necessary collapse that had been artificially delayed for far too long. "Thank you for letting me know, Helen," I said carefully. "How does the house look otherwise?" Helen hesitated. "Honestly, not great. The lawn hasn't been mowed, there's takeout containers piled up on the porch, and I think he might have broken one of the front windows. There's cardboard taped over it now." After hanging up, I sat heavily on Marcia's couch. The home I had maintained so carefully for decades was falling into disrepair in a matter of days. The son I had raised to present himself as successful was watching his carefully constructed life crumble. "You're not responsible for this," Marcia reminded me, setting a cup of tea beside me. "This is what reality looks like when it's not being constantly edited." On day 14, Janet from my church called. "I hope you don't mind me reaching out," she began, awkwardly. "But Evan showed up at the community dinner last night. He didn't look good, Linda. Said he hadn't had a proper meal in days. Mark offered him some work landscaping, but he seemed offended by the suggestion." I thanked her for the information, a complex emotion rising in me, part maternal concern, part grim vindication. Evan had always considered manual labor beneath him, preferring to chase entrepreneurial dreams that never quite materialized. Now, faced with genuine need, his pride was still intact enough to reject honest work. That evening, while Marcia and I were watching a movie, my phone lit up with a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Mrs. Walker?" a professional voice inquired. "This is Meredith Zhao from First Capital Bank. I'm calling about your son's accounts." My pulse quickened. "I'm not authorized to discuss my adult son's finances." "Actually, Mrs. Walker, our records show you as a cosigner on his primary checking account and 2 credit cards. These accounts are now significantly overdrawn, and the credit cards are in default. As a cosigner, you're jointly responsible for these debts." The room seemed to tilt slightly. In my rush to separate our finances, I had forgotten about the accounts I'd helped him open years ago. Accounts I'd remained linked to in case he needed emergency funds. "How much?" I asked quietly. The figure she named made my blood run cold. Nearly $30,000 in combined debt. Money I would be legally obligated to repay if Evan couldn't. After hanging up, I explained the situation to Marcia, who looked uncharacteristically alarmed. "He's going to drag you down with him if you're not careful," she warned. That night, I received a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Mom, my phone got shut off, using Rick's phone. I think I'm in real trouble. Everything's falling apart." My clients are abandoning me. The bank froze my accounts. I don't understand what's happening. For the first time in 2 weeks, I felt a crack in my resolve. This wasn't just about teaching Evan a lesson anymore. His collapse was becoming an avalanche that threatened to bury us both. The next morning, I called a lawyer friend who specialized in financial matters. She agreed to meet me for coffee to discuss options for legally separating my finances from Evan's without abandoning him entirely to his fate. As I was leaving Marsha's apartment for this meeting, my phone buzzed with another text from Rick's number. I lost the consulting contract with Meridian Group. My car is gone. The power just got shut off. I keep waiting for you to fix this like you always do. Why aren't you fixing this, Mom? The rawness of the questions stopped me in my tracks. Like you always do. So he had known, on some level. He had sensed the invisible hand guiding his life, cushioning his falls. He had expected it, counted on it, without ever acknowledging it. For the first time since walking away, I felt something shift from grief toward anger. How dare he expect rescue while simultaneously resenting the rescuer? How dare he take for granted the sacrifices that had kept his world intact? I slipped my phone back into my pocket without responding and continued toward my meeting, my steps more purposeful than before. The collapse was indeed beginning, but it wouldn't claim us both. 3 more weeks passed. With my lawyer's help, I managed to remove myself as cosigner from most of Evan's accounts, though I would still be responsible for a portion of his accumulated debt. I had returned to my house once, while Evan was out, using my spare key to collect essential belongings and important documents. The state of the home had nearly broken my heart. Unwashed dishes piled in the sink, clothes strewn everywhere, the lingering smell of takeout food gone bad. I'd left without taking anything that wasn't absolutely mine. No cleaning up, no note, no groceries in the refrigerator. Just in and out, like a ghost. I'd found a part-time job at a local bookstore to occupy my days and supplement my savings. The routine of shelving books and helping customers find their next read gave me a strange peace I hadn't known I was missing. "You seem different," Marsha observed one evening, as we shared a simple dinner of pasta and salad. Lighter, somehow. I considered this. I think I've been carrying Evan for so long that I forgot what it felt like not to. "Have you heard from him lately?" I shook my head. "Not since I blocked Rick's number last week. He kept texting on Evan's house." I twirled pasta around my fork. "Helen told me Evan pawned his laptop and that fancy watch he bought last year." Marsha raised an eyebrow. "The one he claimed was a gift from a satisfied client?" "The one I gave him for his 30th birthday, I corrected. The client's story was just his way of making it fit his successful image. Rain began to patter against the windows of Marsha's apartment. Light at first, then growing in intensity until it drummed steadily against the glass. The weather forecast had warned of a storm system moving through, bringing the first heavy rainfall of autumn. We had just cleared the dinner dishes when the knock came, so faint at first that we almost missed it over the sound of the rain and dishwasher. "Are you expecting someone?" I asked. Marsha shook her head, moving to the door. She peered through the peephole, then turned to me, her expression unreadable. "It's for you," she said quietly. My heart jumped into my throat. I knew somehow, even before she opened the door. Evan stood in the hallway, soaked through, water dripping from his hair and clothes onto the carpet. His normally confident posture was gone, shoulders hunched, eyes downcast. He looked thinner than I remembered, his favorite jacket hanging loosely on his frame. "Mom," he said, his voice barely audible. I froze, all the carefully prepared speeches I'd imagined delivering in this moment evaporating at the sight of him. My son, my once proud, overconfident son, looked utterly defeated. Marsha touched my arm gently. "I'll give you two some privacy," she said, retreating to her bedroom and closing the door quietly behind her. "How did you find me?" I asked, still standing in the middle of the living room, making no move to invite him in. "Mrs. Henderson from next door," he said, water pooling around his feet. "She saw you leaving with Marsha that first day. I remembered you two were friends from the hospital." I nodded, arms crossed over my chest, protection against the tide of maternal instinct urging me to wrap him in tulle, make him tea, solve all his problems. "Mom, I didn't realize," he began, his voice cracking. "I didn't know." "What didn't you know, Evan?" I asked, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. Everything, he whispered, looking up at me with red-rimmed eyes. The mortgage payments, the car loan, my credit cards, the business licensing fees, the health insurance premiums. He ran a shaking hand through his wet hair. It all fell apart so fast. One minute I thought I was handling everything, and the next, it was like the floor disappeared underneath me. That wasn't the floor disappearing, Evan. That was me stepping away. He flinched as if I'd struck him. Why didn't you ever tell me? A bitter laugh escaped me. Would you have listened? Or would you have accused me of trying to control you? Of not believing in you? His silence was confirmation enough. Can I come in? He asked finally, shivering slightly. I hesitated, then stepped aside, gesturing toward the couch. He moved past me, careful not to tut me, and sat on the edge of the cushion like a visitor afraid of overstaying his welcome. I grabbed a towel from the bathroom and tossed it to him. He caught it with a murmured thanks and began drying his hair. I lost everything, he said, staring at the floor. The consulting business, the truck, my phone. Most of my clothes. They're changing the locks on the house next week. I know, I said simply. He looked up, surprise flashing across his face. You know? Just because I stopped fixing your problems doesn't mean I stopped caring about what was happening to you. Silence stretched between us, filled only by the sound of rain against the windows. I was so angry at you, he said finally. I thought you were being clingy, needy. I had no idea you were the one holding everything together. That was by design, Evan. I wanted you to feel successful, independent, but I wasn't. Not really. He twisted the damp towel between his hands. Mom, I need help. 4 simple words, words I had been waiting years to hear. Not demands or expectations, but a genuine acknowledgement of need. But instead of rushing to embrace him, to tell him everything would be okay, I sat down in the armchair across from him, maintaining the distance between us. What kind of help are you looking for? I asked carefully. He blinked, clearly expecting a different response. I thought maybe I could stay here. Just until I get back on my feet? I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw for the first time not just the boy I had raised, but the man he needed to become. We need to talk about some conditions first, I said. Marcia emerged from her bedroom, assessing the situation with a quick glance between Evan and me. I'll make some coffee, she said, moving to the kitchen. And Evan, I think I have some dry clothes that might fit you. My nephew left some things last time he visited. While Evan changed in the bathroom, I sat silently gathering my thoughts. When he returned wearing borrowed sweatpants and a faded university t-shirt, he looked younger somehow, more like the boy I remembered than the polished image he'd cultivated as an adult. Marcia, I said as she set 3 mugs of coffee on the table, would it be possible for Evan to use your guest room for a few nights? Just until we figure something out. Marcia's eyes met mine, searching for certainty. If that's what you want, Linda. It is, I confirmed. But we need to be clear about what this means. Evan sat across from me, hands wrapped around the steaming mug. I understand, he said, though I wasn't sure he did. Not yet. No, you don't, I replied firmly. This isn't me stepping back into my old role. This isn't me becoming your safety net again. His eyes dropped to the table. Then what is it? It's me offering you shelter while you learn to stand on your own. Real standing, Evan. Not the illusion of it. I outlined my conditions, each one feeling like both a necessity and a risk. He would need to find work, any work, not just the prestigious consulting positions he thought he deserved. He would need to create a payment plan for his debts and stick to it. He would need to attend financial literacy classes at the community center. No more credit cards, no more loans, no more shortcuts. And most importantly, I finished, no more lies. Not to me, not to yourself. Evan was quiet for a long moment. I don't know if I can do all that, he finally admitted. That's the most honest thing you've said to me in years, I replied, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and hope. The next morning, Evan and I went to the local diner where they had a help wanted sign in the window. He balked at first at the idea of waiting tables. This isn't exactly using my business skills, he muttered as we stood outside. Reliability is a business skill, I countered. Humility is a business skill. Understanding the value of honest work is the foundation of everything else. He took the job. The manager, an old friend of mine, promised to hold him to the same standards as any other employee, no special treatment, no exceptions. Over the following weeks, a new routine emerged. Evan worked morning shifts at the diner, came home exhausted but with a small wad of cash tips in his pocket. In the evenings, he attended credit counseling sessions or worked on job applications for more permanent positions. Each night, he kept a ledger of money earned and bills to be paid, a practice the financial counselor had recommended. It wasn't easy. There were nights when I heard him pacing in the guest room, frustrated by how slow his progress seemed. There were days when he came home dejected after job rejections, wondering aloud if he should just give up. You could, I would say. But then what? The question always hung between us, the implicit reminder that the old rescue system no longer existed. One evening, about 2 months after he had shown up at Marcia's door, Evan came home with an envelope in his hand. My first real paycheck, he said, showing me the check from an entry-level position at a small marketing firm. The amount was modest, far less than he once claimed to earn from his consulting work, but it was real. I already calculated what I can put toward my debts this month, he added, showing me his carefully maintained ledger. And I think by next month I might be able to start looking for my own place. Nothing fancy, maybe just a room in a shared house to start. I felt something shift inside me, pride, not for what I had given him, but for what he was achieving on his own. That night, as Marcia and I sat on her balcony watching the stars emerge, she asked the question I'd been avoiding. Do you regret any of it? Stepping back, letting him fall? I considered this carefully. I regret that it took me so long, I finally said. I regret that I mistook protection for love. She nodded, understanding. You know, she said after a while, I always thought parenthood was about sacrifice. But maybe the hardest sacrifice is letting go of the role you thought you needed to play. The truth of this settled over me like a warm blanket. For decades, I had tied my worth as a mother to how well I could insulate my son from consequences. I had needed his dependence as much as he had come to expect my intervention. 2 weeks later, Evan moved into a small room in a house shared with 3 other young professionals. His new job wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. His new accommodations weren't luxurious, but they were earned. When I helped him move his few belongings, clothes, books, the professional attire he'd need for work, I felt none of the old anxiety about whether he would manage without me. I'm still learning, he told me as we unloaded the last box. But I think I'm starting to understand what you were trying to teach me. What's that? I asked. That love isn't about being someone's solution. It's about believing they can find their own. I hugged him then, not as the safety net he'd burned, but as the mother who had finally learned that real love doesn't mean saving someone from every fall. Sometimes it means trusting that they have the strength to rise on their own. And for myself, I was learning too, learning that my worth wasn't measured by my ability to rescue, but by my courage to step back and watch my son become the man he was always capable of being once I stopped standing in his way.